Edelbrack Smith here, broadcasting from somewhere, probably on Earth. GeForce Now recently lost several major publishers, and thus many major games are no longer on its platform. That's just the newest wave of publishers pulling their games from GeForce Now, and it's causing some people to decry the death of the service. So, that's what we're going to cover today, and there's a lot more to it than what's on the surface. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up with all things cloud gaming, by the way. Now, on to the meat of things. Cloud gaming. It's on the rise, and it is definitely the next big thing in games. Don't get me wrong, we've still got a long way to go before it becomes the standard for video games, both in the technology used behind the streaming, as well as improving access to quality of internet across the planet. Additionally, there will likely always be valid uses for non-streaming devices. Sure, 5G may make mobile game streaming ubiquitous, and improved infrastructure could ensure every home was wired and ready to play, but outages do happen. Not to mention data caps, and the fact that some companies are just going to want to be able to control the quality of their games and the way that the consumer experiences them. Currently, if we take Stadia as an example, the customer experience varies wildly depending on internet speed, consistency, Wi-Fi or wired, interference, or other users on the block being active at the same time. I could go on. So, some companies, likely Nintendo, won't want to sacrifice that control of customer experience, at least not entirely. That said, streaming does provide a slew of benefits, even now as it takes its first major steps. As gaming moves into 4 and possibly 8K, file sizes continue to balloon. Download times aren't getting shorter either. Massive patches, while nice, can mean you aren't playing your games when you actually have the time and the will to do so, instead being stuck watching a progress bar for a portion or all of your allotted gaming time. With streaming, all of that is gone. The click of a few buttons and you've not only purchased a new game, but you're already loaded into it fully patched and ready to go. You don't need to wait for downloads or buy a massive hard drive. Others are doing that for you and allowing you to just play. Stadia is, of course, the big name in game streaming right now, though there are a few services that are coming hot in on its heels. Microsoft's xCloud, Amazon's Tempo, etc. One service was, at a time, the most promising of these options: Nvidia's GeForce Now. Unlike other streaming services, GeForce Now was not trying to sell you games on its platform. Instead, it integrated with services like Steam, Epic Game Store, and the dreaded Uplay, as well as others. This meant that you could buy a game on Steam and then play it locally on Steam, or stream it through GeForce Now's servers. Imagine buying a AAA PC game once and having access to it on your gaming PC, your laptop, and your cell phone. That is some amazing value to the customer. So of course, corporate greed wasn't going to stand for it. As GeForce Now came closer to launch, companies began to pull their games from availability on the service. Activision Blizzard leaving meant that they took Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Diablo 3, Overwatch, amongst others. Bethesda, 2K, and of course Xbox Game Studios have all subsequently pulled their games from the service for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is value. Not to the customer, which was already a given with GeForce Now, but value to the publisher. Why would you buy Call of Duty on PC and then also buy the mobile port for your phone, if you could just buy it on PC and play it anywhere? And not some stripped down mobile port either, but the full actual game. It takes revenue streams away from the company. The ability to sell you that same game, or even an inferior version of that game, because you simply don't have another option other than not playing it at all. It's one reason why Stadia is a more enticing option for publishers. They get to sell potentially another copy of those games to the same customer. It'd be easy to see only this aspect as to why companies are pulling their games from GeForce Now. Hell, my naturally cynical brain just assumes the worst, especially in these large video game publishers. But there are other reasons, one of which we touched on in the beginning of this video: control. When a developer and a publisher create and sell a game, they want to know what the customer experience will be. Now, they may not always care, and sometimes they may know of a problem, but it only affects a few people, so they kind of ignore it. But at least they know what the general customer experience is going to be. This is one reason developers tend to prefer consoles. You make a game for the Xbox, and it's going to play the same for pretty much everyone. When you get into PC, things do become a bit more murky, but you do have minimum and required specs for a reason. With GeForce Now, someone can buy a game on Steam, but then stream it to their phone, or even stream it to their PC. The quality might suffer due to any number of factors, and word of mouth may sour on the game if enough people experience problems that are completely out of the control of the developer. And then, of course, there are the companies that are stepping into the game streaming market themselves. Xbox Game Studios removing their games from GeForce Now was always going to happen, and you aren't likely to see any Google or Amazon developed games be made available for the service either. Of course, that's no big loss just yet, but Amazon and Google are poised to take a huge leap into games in the next few years. So, is GeForce Now already dying? Well, no, not exactly. It wasn't likely ever expected that this would become a pillar of their company. In fact, if you look at the biggest players currently in cloud gaming, Stadia and xCloud, they both use AMD's GPUs for their streaming servers. This means that over the next 5 to 10 years, as the world becomes more friendly to streaming services, AMD is going to have more and more data about what makes a good streaming GPU. They'll have long-standing relationships with these big companies who'll share data that allows AMD to improve their drivers and their hardware to meet the specific challenges of game streaming. If, in the next 10 years, Nvidia can convince Google or Microsoft to switch to using their own GeForce GPUs, they'll still likely be far behind AMD in actual real-world experience. Add on to that the fact that as time goes on and AMD continues to improve their streaming hardware, it will become harder and harder for Nvidia to break into that market as they're left further and further behind. Hell, AMD just partnered with Oxide, the company that made the impressive tech behind Ashes of the Singularity, to work on their game streaming technology. GeForce Now doesn't need to be a big success. If it was, I'm sure Nvidia would love it, obviously. But regardless, it allows Nvidia to test their game streaming GPUs in the real world with real games. It'll give them the data they need to not fall drastically behind their competition in this space, and if they can improve their service, they might even be able to use that to entice other companies like Google and Microsoft, into using their GPUs for their streaming software. Nvidia sees the writing on the wall. They know that game streaming is set to break out and possibly become the de facto way that gamers play. That means consumer GPUs are likely to become even more specialized, and it's going to hurt their bottom line. They need to drastically improve their streaming tech, prove themselves to the big companies, and sell those streaming server GPUs if they want to remain in the gaming space in the future. That is likely the entire point of GeForce Now, not as a true customer-facing product that is designed to make a lot of money, but as a cost-neutral testbed where Nvidia can test and improve their technology, keeping them in the arms race. Now, does that mean that GeForce Now is dead or dying as a consumer product? No, don't be silly. Obviously, losing these massive publisher catalogs hurts the service, but there are still far more games available on GeForce Now than there are available on competing services like Stadia. Plus, they're free if you already own the games on another launcher. Big publishers like Ubisoft have declared their support for the platform, which isn't that surprising as Ubisoft has always been willing to try out new business ventures. Look up GameTap sometime, it was a subscription PC service way back when Netflix was just getting started. CD Projekt Red announced that Cyberpunk 2077 will be available on GeForce Now day one. That's just the start. As gamers flock to streaming services, they're going to start to expect certain features, like buying once and playing anywhere, even on their phones. Activision Blizzard will end up having to offer their games for streaming, and they may go with something like Google Stadia, or they may spin up their own streaming service for their games. Though I doubt it, as the cost is, well, let's just say it's prohibitive for most companies. But PC game stores like Steam and Epic Games aren't going to give up without a fight. Neither of these companies is likely to spend the money to buy and maintain game streaming servers the world over, and they aren't likely to go with Stadia as they wouldn't be getting cuts of game sales that way. I imagine that they'll band together through a unified service, something like GeForce Now, and through that they'll continue to sell games on their stores, and they'll push publishers to allow streaming through GeForce Now, because it's the best option for business. Make no mistake, Steam and Epic Games have a lot of pull in the PC games industry, and those two throwing their weight behind a platform like GeForce Now could really propel that service to insane heights. If their technology can eventually compete with Stadia, and from my experience right now it cannot, then that is going to be one hell of a value proposition for the customer. So no, I don't think GeForce Now is dying. They're shrinking a bit, and they'll likely to continue to lose some publishers in the short term, but the service is in a unique niche, not just amongst gaming, but amongst game streaming as well, that could likely make it a real contender. And if not, Nvidia continues to get valuable learnings and continues to improve their streaming technology, preparing to pry AMD's fingers out of those servers one by one if necessary. Do you think that GeForce Now could get a relationship with Steam and other PC game stores to carve out a niche for itself? Let me know in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel for reviews, news, and interesting takes on all things cloud gaming. Edelbrack Smith, signing off.